We all think we'd know what we were looking at.
And I think it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. My left shoulder was facing the front door and my right shoulder was facing the dead-end street. And I saw an orange glow at the corner of my eye, so I turned to look, and just off the street, there was a 40-foot in diameter orange sphere, just marbling like the sun.
But the lights in the sky were never the part that scared him.
I went outside. It was Halloween. The younger kids were just starting to go out and trick or treat. I saw a kid in an alien costume at the end of my building. This was not a kid. I could not fathom that this was a being in front of me.
Then it came back, and this time it spoke through his daughter.
And I looked down at my daughter, and she's pulling on my shirt. She said, "Daddy, he wants to meet you."
And every time it happened, someone was watching.
Out of nowhere, a Black Hawk helicopter came from behind us. The wash from the helicopter, we didn't even hear it coming. It's almost like it just turned on right there in the yard. The spotlight is blinding us.
So, who sends an unmarked Black Hawk helicopter the second a craft shows up over a family's home? Let's find out. Hey everyone, welcome to the Good Trouble Show. I'm Matt Ford. Our guest today is a self-described Arkansas redneck, a hunter, a single father of four, and by his own account, just about the last person on earth who wanted any of this to be true. He is the subject of the documentary Experiencer. He's going to tell you about the night everything changed, but the part that stayed with me the most was what he said happened next, that the aliens were never the part that scared him. The part that scared him was the people who showed up after. Now, what you believe about what showed up in the sky that night is up to you. What he says his government did to his family afterward, well, that's a different question entirely. And it is the one I could not let go of. Please welcome Edgar Mitchell. Eric, how are you, sir?
Doing great, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for joining us on the show. This is your first time on the show, and I know a little bit about your story. We've spoken previously where you kind of gave me some of the background, but for our viewers at home, tell us a bit about yourself, where you grew up, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I grew up in Arkansas. Very simple guy, simple life. Very simple education. Did not believe in anything paranormal at all. You know, I just grew up in one of those families where nobody ever talked about that stuff. And if people do, they must be crazy. So it really jolted itself into my life where it gave me a complete new, worldview going into this. I was a single dad. I moved into a small apartment after a divorce. Just so it was affordable. And I found myself outside of my own apartment. I think it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. My left shoulder was facing the front door and my right shoulder was facing the dead-end street. And I saw an orange glow at the corner of my eye, so I turned to look, and just off the street, there was a 40-foot in diameter orange sphere, just marbling like the sun, rippling like water, and it was stationary, and I had no idea what I was looking at. Probably 20 minutes of squeezing my eyebrows together.
About what time of the day was this? I may have missed that.
It was almost 4:30 in the morning.
Okay.
And I stared at this thing for about 20 minutes. Decided it was some kind of weird optical illusion, and went inside, made coffee, and turned on the news to see if there was any strange weather phenomenon going on. I mean, this thing was 40 feet in diameter. It's really big. Mm-hmm. So I left the door open and kind of leaned on my couch where I can look outside, and it stayed there. So I figured, by the sun comes up, I'm going to get a good look at and laugh at myself.
What motivated you to go outside? Was this just kind of part of your morning routine? What made you go outside and to have a look at what was going on?
I had no idea. I literally went to bed that night, and I woke up standing outside of my front door. I had no idea how I got there. It did bother me. The thought of sleepwalking outside, I could get run over or hurt or something like that, but I have no idea how I got there.
And, and you mentioned that you're pretty much a hard skeptic, that UFOs or anything of that nature, that wasn't something that ever kind of came up in your family growing up, or did you read UFO books or anything like that as a kid,
No.
et cetera?
No. Absolutely
Wow.
nothing like that. As a matter of fact, I never looked at the subject. That was for crazy people. And in my mind back then, I regret it now. But no, nothing like that. No interest whatsoever.
And was there anything that was strange that occurred the night before?
Not that I'm aware of. No, it's just a normal Pixar film with the kids, homework, dinner, tuck everybody in, go to sleep myself. And the next thing I know, I'm standing outside going, oh, what's going on here? Very strange.
And your kids, they were still in bed. They didn't wake up to any of this, correct?
Yes, they were still sleeping.
Okay. And this giant orb, did it emit any kind of sound or anything of that nature?
No, it was completely silent. It was completely stationary as well. It didn't bob or weave or anything like that. The only movement was it kind of rippled like water. If you were like to look at the sun, it had a rippling effect. But the funny thing, and what bothered me the most, is that here's this giant, ball of light, and it should be illuminating the dew on the street. It should be illuminating the whole neighborhood. But it was self-contained. There was no light emanating off of this, so it got more confusing the more I looked at it.
Like, looking back, do you find it odd that you decided to just kind of go back inside and watch TV? You hear often, and I think they call it sort of an inappropriate reaction, where two people will see a UFO and look at it, and then they'll go inside and order a pizza, not think anything of it. Looking back, do you think your reaction to it that first time was a little bit out of the ordinary for yourself?
Not for me. I did stand there for about 20 minutes, with my eyebrows almost touching each other, thinking, what the heck is this?
Sure.
And when you can't identify something like that, you kind of go through every probability and possibility that you can. So I determined that it was an optical illusion because it couldn't be anything else. In my mind, a UFO was a saucer on a fishing string in a 1950s movie. So it never crossed my mind that it could be a UFO.
So you're out there, you're watching this thing for 20 minutes. You go back in to watch TV. Then what happens?
Well, I waited for the sun to come up. And then I was going to go outside and find out what this optical illusion's made out of. Maybe some broken glass and light bouncing off of it. I just tried to rationalize something that wasn't rational. By the time the sun did come up, went straight to the door and it was gone, completely gone.
Okay.
I didn't hear it leave or anything.
Okay. And that day, did you talk to any of your neighbors? Did any of them say, "Hey, did you see anything weird in the sky," or anything of that sort?
Not that particular day. I stayed confused at work. Normally, I'm the guy motivating people at work, talking and making sure everybody's okay. But, that day I was particularly very quiet and kept to myself. I was still, and I don't know why it kept me confused. I could have just maybe let it go and everything would have been okay. But I did have that reaction where it lingered in my mind all day long, whereas why couldn't I stop thinking about it? But that was an odd reaction for sure. But I got home, and I remember picking up dinner and thinking about reading a science magazine that talked about ball lightning years ago. And I decided that had to have been it, and once I had an explanation for myself, I was okay. Back to normal, everything's good. Let's do cartoons with the kids, homework, dinner, and put them to bed. And I went out for my nightly smoke that very day. It was about 9:30 at night. And sorry about the shaky voice, when my mind goes back there. The initial blow is still, bothering me to this day. But I was pacing the one-story apartment, and I kept looking up at that area. And finally, it was maybe an orange ball about this size. It's all I can see in the dark. And it slowly turned all the way on to 40 feet in diameter. It then went completely out very slowly again and repeated, flashing all the way on and all the way off. And it began to move about 2 miles an hour, flashing at me. It made a horseshoe shape around my body. As I turned my body facing it, I realized this was intelligently controlled. I felt a very strong presence. And so as my body's turning, now I'm facing my one-story apartment, and it's just over my apartment. It's about maybe 15 feet from my head. This thing flashed twice and took off as fast as a bullet. You would expect a sonic boom. You would expect the air displacement to even rip me apart. My legs locked up like a scared goat. You know, I couldn't move my legs. And I finally actually duck walked back into my apartment. I was so scared of what this was. So I spent pretty much the entire night on my daughter's laptop because I hadn't owned one at the time. It was 2013. It's ways back. But all I could find was conspiracy theories and Area 51 and, just stuff I just didn't believe in. I needed a real answer, a rational answer, and finally got a nap and went to work the next morning. Now, the very next day I came home from work, my car was overheating. My buddy Dan, he spent 2 terms at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 2 four-year terms, and he lived just across from me, helping me look at the car, and it was the water pump, bad luck. And we talked for a little bit, and he actually brought me out a beer, and I put the beer on the top of my car, and he was bragging about his wife's dinner that she was making, and she was an amazing cook. And he began to go back into his apartment to eat. I reached back to reach for that beer because, darn it, I needed one with that water pump. And I stepped back, and I was I was standing on my own shoelace, so it untied my shoe. And I'm thinking, great, what next, right? So I kneel down and I start to tie my shoe, and I start to feel this like light vibration on the top of my head. Within seconds, it's like if you ever been in a rock and roll concert and you feel that vibration hit your chest, if you can imagine that by a million times aimed at your head, I went the rest of the way to the ground. I felt as if a magnet was pushing me down and back and forth. I was literally scooting back and forth as if I was a metal object. It was so intense that the only way I knew I was throwing up is that my throat would open for a long period of time and close. So I did know I was throwing up repeatedly while this was happening. It lasted for maybe 15 seconds. I pushed as hard as I could off the ground because I felt this sensation coming from directly above me. And it was this object that was over my head. Years later, I spoke to Dan, and him and a friend of his actually saw it happen. And they said there was a pencil beam blue light that came straight down and hit me in the head and stayed there for a while. They were scared. They ran. I don't blame them. But that was, it was terrible. I don't know, at some point it was nighttime. It shouldn't have been. I was looking around like a scared rodent because my first thought is to jump off the concrete and get to my front door. But instead, you just go into hypervigilant mode. I was looking around for movement, for sound, for anything. I know how fast this thing is. And I believed at the time it tried to kill me. So I stayed there on the concrete for quite a while, assessing my area and how fast I was going to run once my body actually could move. But I got into the apartment. I went into the bathroom to throw up again, and I felt that cold floor, and I didn't realize how overheated I was. And so I just laid down on the cold floor and passed out. So it wasn't alcohol induced. I didn't get to that beer. But I just lost consciousness. The next morning I woke up around 5:30 a.m. and I had blood and vomit all over my clothes. I apologize to your audience, but I don't want to be, too graphic. But I just got into the bathtub, clothes and all, and laid there until the hot water ran out.
Before we get back to it, real quick, if you're not subscribed, hit that button, ring the bell, leave a comment, give us a thumbs up. I know it sounds like a lot, but here's why it matters. YouTube sees all of that and basically says to itself, hey, maybe we should recommend this good trouble show to people who don't know it exists yet. That's how that works. Also, you can find us on all the major podcast platforms if you like to listen to us on the go. And while you're there, leave us a review, hopefully a good one. And last thing, I promise we have no sponsors on this show, zero. We are kept alive entirely by people like you. So if you want to help pay the rent here in the studio in LA, which is not cheap, we are on Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And you can also support us right here on YouTube through memberships or super thanks. It means the world to us, and it allows us to keep bringing you great guests like we have today. All right, back to the interview. Now, you spoke a minute ago about your friends that saw this and ran off. Were these neighbors of yours? How did they come to witness this whole thing?
My friend Dan, he lived. If you open my door, he's directly the apartment right across from me. So we talked to each other every single day. It was a very small neighborhood. About 20 apartments, maybe 25. So everybody knew everybody. We'd do birthday parties and barbecues and things of that nature. So I knew Dan quite well. We had been friends for quite a while. You
get sick from this experience. You throw up. There's blood involved. And this was. And I apologize if I missed it. What sort of time of day was this that this particular incident occurred?
It's a little confusing. For me, it started around 5:30, but it was dark once I got back inside. So there was a little bit of a time confusion there for me. I know trauma can cause those kinds of things. Maybe it was something else, but I was definitely traumatized. The next morning, once I changed into dry clothes, I got some cranberry juice because I was a little thirsty. But once the liquid hit my lips, I had no idea how thirsty I was. I was spilling it all over my clothes, and I was just trying to get as much in me as possible. So I was obviously pretty dehydrated at the time. And it seemed like my thoughts were racing, and I thought I was having my first panic attack. I've heard about them. Mm-hmm. I've always been a laid-back, simple guy, so I've never experienced one, but it was the beginning precursor to Savant syndrome.
Yeah. So that morning you wake up, do you decide to go to a doctor, the emergency room? What are you doing at that point after having this? Sounds like pretty terrifying experience.
Well, I wanted to go to the emergency room with everything I am, but at the time of divorce and custody battle and things of that nature, you don't want to walk into a hospital and tell them a giant light had struck you down to the ground.
Sure.
It sounds absolutely insane to any physician out there, at the time anyway. It's becoming more normal now, but I decided I wasn't going to go. I didn't have any insurance anyway. And times were tight, times were hard. So I just decided that, maybe I've got a brain tumor. Maybe I had a stroke. Maybe I have a late onset type of mental illness, and none of this is real, and I'm just perfectly fine. I tried to rationalize all of it because I didn't have time for anything irrational in my life. It was kids, work, homework, bed. Keep it simple and keep my home steady. My kids deserved at least one parent that's going to be there all the time. So that was my major focus.
And were there other people besides your two friends that witnessed this?
Yes. Over time, almost nightly, this object would come back. It would literally come down into the yard. or very close to it. And it began to scare people. It frightened a lot of people. Some people immediately started moving. People in town started hearing about it, and rows of cars would show up at night with loads of people, wanting to see this object. I live in the Bible Belt, so a lot of people were saying I was calling the devil down from the sky.
Okay.
And so I got a lot of ridicule, and every time I'd go to the grocery store or in town, I got a lot of bad looks. But it was ongoing for quite some time.
Okay. And so you have all these people that saw this thing. Did anybody call the police or anything to come out and look at it or see what was going on?
The police were called once, and at the time I regretted not doing it myself, but someone called the cops. 2 officers got out of the squad car. They looked at the crowd. They looked up at this object. They looked at each other. They got back in the squad car and they left. No paperwork was ever done on it. So there's literally no safety there. And at the time I was going through Facebook looking for anybody that knew anything about the paranormal. First time, reaching out or looking into it. And I found one MUFON investigator that kind of blew us all off. I got 19 witnesses together. And he never answered the phone, and the next day, just a snide attitude over what was going on. So luckily, I found Barry Gaunt, Kentucky State Director, MUFON, and I told him, I need help. Something is going on here, and that was a 4-hour conversation. He realized at the time that this was pretty drastic, so he sent out Cindy Bailey Dove from Arkansas MUFON, and she was extremely nervous investigating what was going on. She talked to all the witnesses. Now, I did have all kinds of equipment problems. She couldn't get any of her cameras to work, and they were all fully charged. So my daughter lent her a camera, and she was able to start conducting interviews and finding out what's going on, electromagnetic field disturbances, possibly everything you can think of. After 30 years of investigations, you could tell she was very shaken, and that bothered me as well.
Did she ever see the object?
Yes.
Okay.
It was far enough away where you can quite possibly say drone, but if it was a drone, it was huge. And the wrong color. So she couldn't get 100% make, but she did say that thing is not supposed to be there. That's very strange. So, like I said, she was extremely nervous about this particular case.
Okay. So this orange object appears a bunch of nights in a row. At what point do you think that you were abducted? Bring us to that point.
I talked to Barry. We call him Bear, big guy, big heart. Did tell me it's a possibility that I would be abducted, and that was just too absurd for me, Matt. I couldn't wrap my brain around the possibility of that being true or ever happening. So it really didn't bother my thought process at all. I wasn't worried about that. One morning I woke up to my daughter screaming, and I was on the couch at the time with a loaded .38 under my pillow, because if anything came through my front door, I can protect the children. I ran into her bedroom. She had her mouth open and her tongue was moving like she was trying to scream again, but she couldn't. And so I ran up to her and I looked at her arms, and they had hundreds of holes. If you can imagine a hole in skin that's big enough to fit an entire raindrop, in it. If you can imagine hundreds of those from the shoulder cuff to the elbow, hundreds, looking like a honeycomb, but skin. Mm-hmm. The skin was so dehydrated that she wasn't bleeding or pussing or anything like that, but it was just the mutilation was so shocking for me. I couldn't imagine what was going on. And she took her little finger, because I was panicking, asking her, what's happening? What's going on? What bit you? Do you have bugs? What's going on? And she pointed her little finger out and touched my arm. And that's when I looked down and realized I had the same thing. And I rushed her to the pediatrician. I golfed with the guy. He'd been a pediatrician for over 30 years, and I trusted him. And he said, Eric, I have no idea what's going on here. These aren't bug bites. This is not a rash. This is not a dermatology issue. He did tell us to get some vitamin E oil to help with the scarring. If anything persisted, get back a hold of him, and we could see a dermatologist about what could possibly be going on. The next day, going through this Savant syndrome, my son was pouring cereal, and it was extremely loud. My auditory was picking up everything. And so I sat up, lack of sleep. Son, can you be quiet? I'm trying to sleep here. And I saw a triangle, looked like someone had taken a razor blade and just cut a triangle of skin out of his forehead. So I jumped up and I said, son, you bumped your head. You must have been sleepwalking. You're hurt. And I walked him into the bathroom, splashed it with cold water, hydrogen peroxide, and he looked up in the mirror and looked at me. He said, Dad, look at your head too. And I thought, there's no way we could both sleepwalk and bang our heads in the same marking. That doesn't make any sense. So I said, hold on to the counter. I'll be right back. Don't move. And I went into his sister's room, pulled over the blankets, and she had the same exact thing on her forehead as well. So I got a hold of Bear and talked to him about it. And if you get a good enough UV light, there's a blue, orange, or green indelible dye. You can't wash it off. It wears off after 4 to 6 weeks or so. And you can check your body in the dark to see if there's any remnants left over after these scenarios. And the majority of the time, you're going to find those substances. It's a medical dye that doesn't come off easy. So that's also frightening to see that kind of evidence in something that you couldn't possibly believe. It takes a long time to get over that, and it's really hard.
How long were did these wounds persist? How long did it take for them to heal up or disappear?
After about a month, they would kind of burst open and bleed. During the summertime, dead heat in Arkansas, we were wearing long sleeve shirts to cover everything up. I didn't want people asking me questions that I couldn't answer. And so I would have to bring a change of clothes everywhere. So if one would burst open, I could change my clothes and then go on about my day. But it took a long time to heal. The scars are really prominent still to this day after 14 years. So,
did you see a doctor about what had happened to you in terms of the these wounds or whatever you want to call them?
I did not. No, I like I said, I didn't have insurance.
Right.
No real play money. I wasn't gonna go to the doctor for myself, but of course the kids are number one priority. So I made sure that they got checked out. This poor doctor was extremely confused. He's just never seen anything like it before.
At what point did you see sort of non-human intelligence, beings, whatever you want to call them?
The first one, I went outside. It was Halloween day, and the younger kids were just starting to go out and trick or treat. My son was just leaving the house, and I went outside with them, just to let them know safety precautions. Don't eat any candy until I check it. Normal, dad stuff. And I saw a kid in an alien costume at the end of my building. And at this point, all of our neighbors know there's something going on. And I thought it was, a bit of a spoof for one of the parents to put one of the kids in an alien costume. So I'm smiling and walking up because I want to see which kid this is, And the closer I got to it, it was standing right in the tree line. The more I realized this costume is extremely prominent. You can see the collarbone. You can see the little black veins. This was not a kid. And I knelt down in front of it, mostly because my knees stopped working. It was just, I could not fathom that this was a being in front of me. And it made a little bit of a gargling sound looking at me. And then it stepped a couple of steps back into the woods. And that was my moment to get away, to back up and get the heck out of there. And as I was running back toward my children, my son was at a bad vantage point to see it, but my daughter saw it just fine. And she actually drew a picture of it. And I didn't know she could draw that well, but I guess that kind of burnt into her mind. That's something you can't forget.
Did you have any kind of, hear any sort of like communication from it other than the gurgling? Any thoughts in your head? Anything of that nature?
No, nothing like that. It was just like a gurgling, popping sound coming from its throat. And it was just frightening.
Yeah, that had to be. So how did your kids react to that? When you run back into your apartment, and then what happens?
They were standing outside, so they saw it happen. My son didn't catch it from his vantage point, but like I said, my daughter caught it really well, and she was just in shock. She said, "Dad," she kept repeating, "Dad, that was real. That was real." And I said, "I know, sweetie."
Talk about your kind of state of mind after this. So you walk, you go back to your apartment and you're talking to your daughter. What is going through your head?
I was hoping that I was insane. I was hoping that this is not real. My brain, Matt, fought it every step of the way. I wasn't the type of guy to believe this stuff. I'm the last person to pick up a UFO book. I've got better things to do, like fishing and just being a redneck in Arkansas, living a simple life. And so my brain really couldn't accept any of this at all, and I fought it, every step of the way. And I couldn't even really tell you the point of acceptance in totality. Maybe one little piece at a time I could consume and try to wrap my head around. But it took a long time for me just to accept the fact that I'm an experiencer. And
you talk about developing this Savant syndrome. What is Savant syndrome for those people? I have no idea what it means.
It's very rare. A lot of times someone will sustain a head injury, and instead of it causing brain damage, it wakes up areas of the brain. And it could be a very difficult life after that. There's people that can just sit in front of a piano for the first time and play amazing music, or all of a sudden be really proficient at math out of nowhere. There's rare cases out there, but they are pretty fascinating. I called my investigator a couple days into this, and saying, "Hey, Bear, I've got some stuff for you. The kids have, written some things down." And he's saying, "Who is this?" And I said, "It's Eric." And he said, "No, it's not." And I was like, "Yeah, it's me." He said, "Eric, where's your accent? Why are you talking so fast? Why?" He was baffled. Like, what is going on here? I literally had to prove to him it was me, because it was just like literally talking to a different person, a much smarter person. And for me, it was very difficult because I didn't know how to adjust, to this rapid fire brain. So that was another, huge thing to learn how to accept. And that took years.
Did this just kind of turn on like a switch, or did it sort of slowly, was there like a kind of slow onset of it? Yeah,
there was a couple of days where I thought I was in a steady panic attack. And to this day, I still have never had a panic attack. But, that's what my thoughts were. that
Okay.
my brain was just racing from fear and confusion, and everything will settle down eventually. But that didn't turn out to be the case.
This encounter with the being on Halloween, I take it that there were other encounters with this being, or what else happened to you in relation to the whole abduction thing?
Well, the whole time this object was coming back, I could be in the middle of doing anything, and I would drop what I was doing, walk straight to the door, and I knew exactly where to look. It's almost as if I knew. I was feeling that it was there. I can't really explain that, but a lot of people say I just thought to look up, and there it was. I mean, it's part of the phenomenon, not just me exclusively, but there was an occasion where I was walking to the door randomly, and the kids knew to grab their cameras when they see me do that. And instead of looking up, I looked straight forward, and it was dark, but you can see it standing there, and I thought, this has got to be some light bouncing off of a trash can or something. It can't be real. So instead of walking straight to it, I kind of did like a half moon walk to get a better vantage point before, I walked up to it. And I looked down at my daughter, and she's pulling on my shirt. She said, "Daddy, he wants to meet you." And I said, "Stay here," and she was filming on her phone. And I did a half moon walk. And once I get about 10 feet away from it, my whole body just stiffened. Like this thing just blinked. I was kind of frozen for a second. It jerked its arm really fast. And that movement sent me into fight or flight. So I'm running toward my daughter. She's yelling, "Daddy, no, he wants to meet you." She was really emotional about that, and she wouldn't go in the house. So I threw her up over my shoulder and ran inside and locked a deadbolt. But that was the second time I've seen one of these beings, if you will.
And was this the same height as the one that you thought was a kid in a Halloween costume?
No, this one was a lot taller. It was maybe 5.5 feet tall.
Okay, and did it have similar face?
Yes, very similar.
Okay.
What people would portray as grays on television, those silly, sci-fi movies.
Okay, and so you go back in, throw your daughter over your shoulder, go in, close the deadbolt. What happens after that?
Well, 2013, and mental health people will tell you this as well. Trauma in, trauma out. In 2013, for me, the entire timeline bounces all over the place because trauma doesn't allow you to kind of iron everything through. The next one is a bit confusing. I went to go outside. I looked up, and I didn't see anything, which was strange. I'm thinking, what's going on? I get this right every single time. It's almost a little game for me after a while, to pinpoint exactly where it's at. And I realized that the light of a star had just bent around the edge of something. And I kind of looked around, and I realized there was a black triangle above my house and above me. And it was huge. It was the size of maybe a football field. I had a neighbor down the street. I heard him scream out. He was an older gentleman, never really met him in person, scream out, "Honey, go get my gun." And I look over, and he's in his yard, and he's looking up at this thing. She's running out. She's running out to hand him the shotgun. He grabbed his chest, and he went to his knees. Now, Matt, I'm the type of guy, if somebody's in trouble, I'm going to get to that person and get them help. I don't care who it is. I'm that guy. Some people are stand around people. They won't, intervene at all. But in my mind, I'm going to get him an ambulance, make sure he's okay, elevate his head, elevate his feet, see if he's conscious, all the basic thoughts. But I woke up the next morning, and I don't remember anything of that night. And I found out later on that man passed away from a heart attack. And I always think, how did I get to bed that night? how did I not run to this man and help him? How there's just a big blank spot in my memory. Excuse me, choked me up a little bit. Years later, this lady was having an estate sale. She was going into the nursing home, and I went to see what they had for sale and met with his wife. And I told her, I said, I was there that night when your husband passed away. I saw it too. And she couldn't even say anything to me. She just threw her arms around me and started crying. So
let's talk about the implants. I understand that implants were found. Was it just in you or your kids as well?
Just me. I every morning when I would go to work, I would sit outside and wait for my boss to show up with the key. And I'd always have these little shards of metal in my fingers, and I'd pick them out, but I didn't know where they were coming from. I didn't know what I was touching that was metal. I'm not an iron worker or anything like that. And the metal would just crumble when it would come out of my skin. So I vaguely mentioned that to Bear, and he sent somebody down from MUFON to take a look, and he was getting hits on my body. He called Bear up. He said, "Yeah, we've got implants." And so I didn't know what that meant at the time. They got a hold of Dr. Roger Leir, and they scheduled me as patient 18. I was going to go to Dolores Cannon's conference here in Arkansas. They explained, just a small cut, and they're going to be able to remove it. And I was a little scared about doing that, but Roger Leir seemed like a great guy. Steve Colburn, great guy. They introduced me to the other patients so I can, feel more comfortable about what was going on. And that did help. Timothy Cullen, patient 9, wonderful guy. And 2 weeks before surgery, Dr. Roger Leir passed away. So we didn't have that particular surgery. I'm still good friends with Steve Colburn, though. He just needs to keep his equipment in the closet when I visit. As soon as I show up, he wants to scan me more. I'm thinking, no, let's go have lunch instead.
Were any of these implants removed after Dr. Leir's death by anyone else?
No, it's incredibly hard to find a surgeon that's going to touch something like that.
Right. Okay. And so as far as you know, they are still inside you?
Yes.
Okay. Any thought as to what the purpose of these things are?
Well, we talked a lot about it. A lot of people think GPS, but the structure is just too complex. It can't be just a tracking device. The outer layer, as soon as you remove them, it's like a shiny metallic wrapper that goes around it. And the moment you remove them, you can't even cut this wrapper with surgical steel. It's that difficult. But within minutes, that substance starts to flake apart. Now, this tells the body it belongs in the body. So your body doesn't reject it at all. Your nerves and tissue and everything like that just grow around it. Like I think if we had that type of technology here, we could do heart transplants, kidney transplants without medication, and a lot of the problems we have today in the medical field, it would just be gone. But the metal structure inside has a lot of atom-sized microtubules. So it was suspected that not just a GPS system, but a system to study your epigenetics turning on and off that could help monitor your emotions. It can monitor, what your body is doing at every moment. And, they don't signal much, 1.6, 1.7 megahertz, but when they do signal, that's the hertz range.
At some point, some weird stuff starts to happen in terms of you being surveilled. Tell us about that.
I came out one night, and Dan is bellied up to my Cadillac, and I didn't know why he was standing there, but I looked at the direction he was looking at, and this object was in the tree line right in front of him, and it was just stationary just below the tree line. So I got next to him and bellied up. I was like, "How long has it been here?" He said, "About 10 minutes." And I'm like, you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm okay. I've heard about these at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. You know, people would whisper about these things, and pilots would talk about it, you know, but he was just immersed in the moment. My friend Christy, she worked the night shift as a CNA, so she never saw it until this point. But she came around the corner with a bottle and some shots to celebrate something. I can't remember what it was, but she stopped and she said, "Holy bleep, that thing is real," because you know a lot of people told her about it. So she stood next to us. The kids opened the door. They saw it, and so all of us were bellied up to my Cadillac, looking at this thing. It's almost like walking through the woods on a nice hike, and all of a sudden there's a bear 10 feet away. You know, it's that feeling. Um, Now, out of nowhere, a Black Hawk helicopter came from behind us. So the object immediately took off. The wash from the helicopter, we didn't even hear it coming. It's almost like it just turned on right there in the yard. So I'm holding onto my hat because of the wash. He's right up in our face. The spotlight is blinding us. He took the spotlight away and went up and down the street with the spotlight, turned around, looked in the yard next to us, and raised up and took off. So I told my daughter, I was like, sweetheart, why don't you make some coffee? The military's going to be here. We're going to get some help. We're going to get some answers, you know, finally. And we stayed up almost all night waiting for a call or for the military to show up and help us. But that wasn't the case. My neighbor Debbie, she called me. She was a porter at Lakeshore Condos just right down the street. And she went in to change this man's soap and sheets and clean up a little bit. And there were pictures of me and the kids all over his bed. There was a ledger of everything that we were doing. And so Debbie calls me and she said, "There's a man stalking your family. You need to know about this." And I said, "Hang up the phone, go to the office and get that man's name. You know, I don't need a creep walking around town taking pictures of my family. This is not cool." So she called me up and she said his name is Lieutenant Colonel Dallas C. Wood. So I turned that into my investigator, and my investigator said, "Eric, this man worked for the Pentagon at one time. He's retired now, and he passed away back in 2015, I think. But there were more helicopter treatments and stuff like that, and it was more harassment than it was anything. I had recruiters coming over that weren't recruiters. My car was bugged. My house was bugged. We found the devices, and it became a living nightmare. You know, how do you get away from this? How do you get out of this? And, you know, finally my daughter, she got accepted to college in Maine. And I thought to myself, that's a perfect way out. I can just go out there, make sure she makes it on her own, start my life fresh, and put it all behind me, you know, and get back to a simple life. And it was a wonderful daydream. I packed up the car in the middle of the night. We had a great road trip out there, singing songs and playing games. And September 1st, 2014, I was standing on my third story back deck, talking to my new neighbors and getting along with them. And I got this feeling, Matt, and I knew what it was. I thought this was over. I turned around. It was going through the park across the street, came up over the tree line and dipped down right in front of our third story deck. Our neighbors were kicking over chairs and pushing each other, trying to get back in the building and away from this object. And me and the kids just stood there like, how is this happening? You know, how? But, you know, at the time, I ran into Starborn Support. It was a support group, and got with Audrey Hewins. Since Bear saved my life and coached me through so much of this stuff, I decided I was going to do the same thing. I was going to help people because there is no help. And so I got with her, and we started helping people like ourselves. Now, we did go to a conference one day, and Audrey's a tough-willed woman. I've always had so much respect for her and her drive. And she stops walking with me, and I'm like, "What are you doing, Audrey? What's going on?" And I look at her, and she's staring at Travis Walton, and I'm like, "Well, what? Don't stare. It's kind of rude, Audrey." She goes, "That's Travis." And I was like, "I'll introduce you to him." And she said, "You know him?" I'm like, "Yep, I know Travis. We're uh, the only two people on record being knocked down by an orange, thing with a blue energy coming out of it." So naturally, Travis wanted to meet me immediately. So I introduced them, and they're falling in love right in front of me. They just made me sick. But we ended up bringing Travis home with us, and so he lived with us for about 8 months.
I want to go back and talk about this Colonel Wood that was tracking your movements of your family and whatnot. Were you able to ever confront him yourself?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't able to. I wasn't sure if I should. I wanted to report him to the proper authorities, but who are the proper, authorities? Who are these people in these unmarked helicopters? Who are these people that are putting GPS units in my vehicle? It turns out, working with experiencers now all over the world, over 130 countries, by the way, this scenario where these things become attracted to you, and it attracts these unofficial officials that use you as bait. You're the bait. What they're after is those technologies, and so they monitor, harass. In some cases, if you start losing your mind, they do everything they can to try to make you more crazy. And so it's to say that this is happening in our country. I'm still at disbelief about it, but time and time again, I get calls from people that are dealing with this for the first time, and it's almost the exact scenario where these people track what's going on, and then they bring out teams to decide how they're going to retrieve these objects and technologies.
For you, what was the most frightening experience of this entire thing? Was it the government? Was it the NHI? What part of it frightened you the most?
I think for me and my neighborhood, it was. I can't really say government. People use that term loosely, but everyone was more scared of those guys. Everybody was more scared of those guys. Some people were having a wonderful spiritual experience. Some people felt love emanating from the craft. But these harassment types seemed extremely dangerous, and it was scary. I mean, if you think about it, if a spotlight from one of those helicopters is on you, that means there's a 50 millimeter gun camera aimed at you as well. And Blackhawks never leave the ground without live ammunitions. And this is what's being aimed at my children.
This object, or whatever you want to call it, did it leave any sort of physical marks or evidence on the ground of its presence? Anything of that nature? Radiation?
Yeah, electromagnetic radiation. My hair started falling out. I needed glasses because I couldn't see. My eyes were burned. My face and shoulders looked like a typical sunburn, but it stung more. But there was also, when Cindy Bailey Dove came to film things, I would point to the area and her camera would, show up electromagnetic disturbance. So it left traces behind as well. My hair, eyes, teeth, skin, you can't fix that. You just get old and deal with it. But that was, from the night it knocked me down.
Were there any other scientists or doctors that you worked with in addition to Roger Leir? So you mentioned he passed just a couple weeks before these implants were supposed to be removed. Were you studied by any other scientists or academics after that? Well,
over time, Bear would send people out, to gather evidence and take a look at me. It was definitely clinical. There were some uncomfortable times having pictures of me naked, just for investigation purposes and marks and stuff like that. But no physicians that I know of. Now, once ufology heard about me and knew the case was real, it leaked a little bit. And so they started calling me. We want you at our conference. We want you to speak. And after a while, I felt like a circus freak, to get on stage and everybody smiling, and entertained. And I can't even tell you what that felt like, but it was degrading. So I turned to science. I got with one of my clients. He was a PhD Berkeley candidate. And at the time he was going through hell. His name was Ray Hernandez. He was a tax attorney in Florida. And he was going through a very hard time. He introduced me to Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He was Apollo 14's, sixth man on the moon. An amazing guy, brilliant man. And we would do nightly talks, about how we're gonna stab at this. It's a terrible thing. So Edgar thought we should do the world's first academic study into experiencers, and we all agreed. And so those guys, they're tasked with coming up with 20 PhDs to conduct looking at these things. And my job was to go through all my clients that I've worked with in the past and say, hey, I need you to go online, take this survey. It's going to help us out a lot. And it turned out to be a really, really accurate study. And that gave me ammunition to approach other PhDs and say, hey, are you aware of this? So I didn't really want to be in ufology. I wanted to be in science where I can get some answers. They can get some answers. And so it kind of became a virus. You get one guy interested, you feed them all the information you have. They get they're scientists, they're curious, but there's also a huge social stigma that needs to be removed. And so that's a problem, but I know a lot of scientists behind the scenes, not funded, but when the lights are out and the janitor's mopping the floor, they are, going after it. They're getting answers. Dr. Jim Segala, really proud of him. Awesome guy, brilliant man. He invented a thing called the MUFON machine, and it's got 300 sensors. You put it in the experiencer's home and just leave it there. Hook it up to the internet and leave it there. Forget about it. And Jim is getting so much data, with his machine. It's just incredible. So it's just amazing how brilliant people can just find ways around the impossible and get the data that they're looking for. But I've met some incredible people over the years, when it came to that kind of thing. But I think, once the stigma is removed, these scientists are going to come out with an awful lot of data right off the bat. Now, there's a few that just, like Dr. Jim Segala, that really doesn't care. I've got the data, the heck with the stigmatism to this. And there's also a gentleman that I met back in 2022 at a conference where I went upstairs to give my friend Heidi a hug. That Savant syndrome locked onto him instead. And I began to have a conversation with him about things I couldn't possibly know. And things got very deep and very woo-woo. And it blew his mind. And he's been talking about me on a lot of different radio shows. Dr. Michael P. Masters, anthropology professor. So I don't know if you heard about that situation, but it is true. It did happen. Heidi was there with me. She was involved somehow. But yeah, the more scientists get their hands on this, the better it's going to become. There's so many people like me. You wouldn't believe it. You cannot be in a crowded grocery store without being in the same room as an experiencer. We know how to hide it. We're chameleons. A lot of times our spouses don't even know. But my case seems to be a little bit different because everything was out in the open.
In 2016, you say you got a call from a manual-only called Bob, and you've described him as an intelligence figure, sort of like a smoking man from X-Files. Who is this guy? How did he find you? And what kind of stuff did he tell you?
Myself, Travis, Audrey, the Allagash twins, some of the biggest cases in America, he would contact and give us information. Now, at the time, I was in touch with this scientist. His name was Joseph Firmage at InterNASA. His company was called International Academy of Science and Arts. And we were talking about his prototype, free energy prototype. And at the time, Bob wanted to have a meeting. So we met in Vermont at a cottage, Jim Weiner, the Allagash twins, his house. And we shared pictures, showed videos. Bob was upset that a $14 million plane and a $4 million camera could not get better pictures than us. And I told him, I said, there's a difference between chasing these things and these things chasing you. You can get better, footage that way. And we had a great time. And he said, the reason why I brought you guys here is because next year at the New York Times, there's going to be an article that's going to kick off disclosure. And he said, you guys have a responsibility of being in the picture, because he's heard discussions where they're not going to say that we exist, that we suffer, that we live here, we pay taxes, and we're just going to get swept under the rug. And so, Travis is getting older. Audrey she has permanent brain damage. She was taken out of the picture. I was sitting 4 feet away from her watching TV, and she started saying, ow, ow, ow. And I'm thinking, she loves her cats. I thought maybe a cat would scratch the back of her hair or something, but I looked over, and in real time, I saw her face turn pink, then red, then bright red, and then the skin rapidly peeling on the thin skin around her eyes and her ears. And I had no idea what to do, how to help her. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't find out till years later that there are weapons that can literally microwave a human being. And so not too long after that, Audrey had a couple of black SUVs behind her on black ice in Maine. You don't do that. It's just dangerous. And I told her twin sister to go out to the highway and have Audrey follow her home safely, so she'll be okay. I was out of state at the time. There was nothing I could do. And her sister found her car completely totaled, and Audrey was sitting in the street, completely catatonic. Her eyes wouldn't even respond to light. She spent 8 months in a mental health facility. They fed her through a tube. And after 8 months, she started to speak in rhymes and riddles, and nothing made sense to anyone. They called me. Her and I were so close that I could finish her sentences, And so I was able to decipher a lot of things that she was saying, but she does not remember to this day what happened to her, what happened to her brain, or anything. Not too long after that, she was in the hospital. I know this sounds like a sci-fi movie, but this is true. This is my life. 2 people dressed up as police officers went into her room and beat her beyond belief. They had to rebuild her shoulder and multiple surgeries. And I don't think these 2 men were ever found. But Audrey had a conference, Experience Your Speak, every year. A lot of people know her. A lot of people in ufology knew her. And she was a pillar in what little community we had. And it was just terrifying to see what they would do to such a big-hearted human being.
What do you think the purpose was? Was it to intimidate her from speaking any further of her experiences? If you were to guess, what was the reason for that?
At the time, we were getting a lot of that type of harassment. I ended up with mycotoxin poisoning in my blood, and it was killing me. The doctor said there's no treatment, and you have a very small chance of survival, around the same time. So I think whoever these people are wanted us to shut up. We were doing things. We were doing a lot of things. And we were also digging into some names that we probably shouldn't have been digging into, but it was out of curiosity, about the cover up and why things have to be the way they are. Why can't we be accepted into everyday society? Why do we have to keep our struggling to ourselves, and just pretend everything's okay? It's not right. It's just not right. But back to Bob, he told us all about this. And if you followed the story, now in Nevada with INTERNASA, International Academy of Science and Arts, there were some people in the CIA that was trying to make Joseph Firmage popular for the release. That's the team that's going to show the world that UFOs exist. They got rid of him and they picked up Tom DeLonge, and because he was already popular, and it became TTSA, to the Stars of Academy of Science and Arts. So the name changed a little bit, but the plan was still there underway. And you know the rest of the story, I'm sure.
Sure. And the names that you mentioned earlier that you shouldn't have dug into, as far as you know, can you say who those names were that you were digging into?
The Aviary, the Aquarius, the Working Group. There was quite a few people in there, a lot of counterintelligence, a lot of people that are retired and should not be acting on American people on an official, basis at all. I believe that's very, very illegal.
And the harassment, do you think it was coming from the government or private contractors? What is your sort of hypothesis on where those assets were coming from?
I personally can't say for sure, but I can surmise that it's private industry that hires retired special forces and CIA to do their bidding. And, a lot of these people can't adjust back to a normal life. They can't debrief or decommission. So they take these jobs to live that same type of lifestyle. And these technologies are most likely priceless. So getting your hands on that stuff would be a payday for sure. So it would make obstacles like me look like nothing.
You said something striking, that hundreds of your interviews and talks have been scrubbed off of the internet or taken down. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I've done over 400 interviews. I've done 100 interviews just with my lead investigator. I've done, I think, like 26 public talks. Just the majority of all that's been deleted from the internet. The Google search engine shows its algorithm, and I've never been looked up by anyone on Google at all. So I talked to my friend Science Bob about that. He said, Eric, the only people that can actually do that is in the NSA. So my YouTube channel went down. I was interviewing a lot of scientists and investigators and stuff like that. Really good stuff, for the public to kind of make it easy for folks to look at the subject in a scientific manner instead of some sort of sci-fi movie,
And I would imagine that all of this has had some kind of financial cost for yourself personally. Is that the case?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Moving around, picking what job I can find, I could have pursued so much, but I just couldn't, survival is key. It's number one. So yeah, financially put me in destitution, now I've never used this subject to try to make money. I could have taken the popular route and said yes to all the radio shows and yes to all the public talks, and set up some sort of mechanism, but that just made me feel wrong.
Can't even imagine having gone through what the experiences that you've had, but really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this. Is there any other part of your story that you haven't shared or that I haven't asked about that you would like to address or bring up?
Well, there's a lot of fascinating things, but one that's really fascinating to me is working with other experiencers worldwide, to get to know the cultures in Japan. I've been talking to some of their government officials about their disclosure, and so they're pushing forward slowly but surely. But all the other cultures and people you get to meet, different religions, different, everything, but they're still an exact match of every other experiencer I've met. So it's become very fascinating, and it's alleviating for me too, in a way, to know there's that many of us out there, and when you wake up in the morning and you think about the world we live in, and that all of this is going on, but nobody's going to say anything, just blows my mind, it's just surreal. But I'm going to continue helping people like myself to the day I die. And hopefully we can get some more help out there, because we have a higher suicide rate than servicemen and women that come home from war. So it's a heavy-hearted thing to know, but it's also fascinating that we could be classified scientifically, but it's not been done yet.
Thanks again for joining us, and best of luck to you. And I'm super happy that you're out there supporting other experiencers. And because, I again can't even imagine what it must be like dealing with this kind of stuff. So really appreciate your bravery and your willingness to help your fellow experiencers.
I do have a independent social network, nothing but experiencers in there. If somebody out there is hurting, if you need to just compare notes or meet new people like yourself, contact me. I'll screen you and get you in there as soon as possible.
Fantastic. We'll put a link to that in the YouTube description so people can find you. So thanks again for joining us, and again, thanks for sharing this really kind of horrific experience. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Folks, if you enjoyed our interview with Edgar Mitchell, you're gonna love this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and if you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button.